The chandelier above me flickered, its crystal prisms scattering jagged light across the starlight ballroom's polished marble floor. I stood at the edge of the room, my fingers brushing the pearl clasp on my blazer, steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. The air was thick with the scent of roasted sea bass, rosemary, and the faint, briny tang of ocean salt drifting through the open terrace doors. Coastal Crest Resort, my resort, perched on Malibu's cliffs, gleamed under the California sunset, its glass walls reflecting a sky bruised with gold and crimson. I'd spent weeks orchestrating every detail for tonight's gala: crisp white linens, wine glasses aligned like sentinels, staff moving in silent precision. The room was a masterpiece, a testament to my vision, but perfection is a fragile thing, and I should have known it would shatter the moment I stepped into their world. I'm Sophia Marin, and this place, this sprawling empire of luxury, is mine. Not in the way they flaunt their legacy, with their old money name and older grudges, but in the ink of a contract that says I own 51% of Coastal Crest. My blood, sweat, and every cent of my Aunt Lila's inheritance built this haven from the brink of foreclosure. I fought city planners, negotiated with contractors, handpicked every supplier while they sipped martinis and played golf. But to them, my husband James's family, I'm nothing more than an inconvenience, a shadow they'd rather erase. Tonight, I wasn't the host, not in their eyes. I was just Sophia, the woman who married into their dynasty, the one they'd never let forget her place. The ballroom hummed with their polite chatter, the clink of silver against porcelain, the low laughter of people who've never known a day of want. The Brandt family held court among Malibu's elite, their name a currency of power and privilege. I moved through the crowd, quiet, composed, placing the final chilled salad plate before Margaret, my mother-in-law. Her eyes didn't meet mine, they never did. Instead, she scanned the room, her diamond earrings catching the light as she counted heads, her lips curling into a smile that was more performance than warmth. Margaret Brandt was a conductor of this orchestrated evening, every gesture calculated, every glance a command. Her daughter, Victoria, sat nearby, wineglass in hand, her smirk as sharp as the edge of a blade. James, my husband, was at her side, his tie slightly askew, his eyes avoiding mine. I glanced at my name card, tucked at the far end of the table, half hidden by the service door. A deliberate slight, one of many I'd endured over the years. I walked over, my heels clicking softly against the marble, and reached for the chair. The legs scraped the floor, a small sound, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Margaret's voice sliced through the room like a shard of glass. "The help doesn't dine with family." The words landed like a slap, sharp and cold. The room froze. Forks hovered mid-air. A cousin I barely knew stared at his plate, cheeks flushing. Victoria's smirk widened, her wine-stained lips twitching as she tapped her glass, keeping tempo with my humiliation. James shifted in his seat, his eyes flicking to me, then away, as if I were a problem he couldn't solve. The silence was suffocating, a weight that pressed against my chest, urging me to shrink, to disappear. Every muscle screamed at me to sit, to smile, to let it slide. I'd done it before, swallowed their barbs, played the dutiful wife, the invisible partner. I'd let their whispers and sidelong glances roll off me like water, but tonight, something in me snapped, not loudly, not with a scream, but with a quiet, dangerous clarity. I let go of the chair. My eyes swept the table, meeting Victoria's smirk, the cousin's averted gaze, James's silence. The scent of the sea bass turned sour in my nose, the rosemary bread no longer comforting. I lifted the napkin from my place setting, my fingers moving with deliberate calm. I folded it slowly, not into a square, but into an origami crane, a trick I'd learned from a guest years ago, an elderly Japanese woman who'd stayed at the resort during its early days. She'd said the crane meant resilience in the face of chaos, a symbol of hope that could soar above storms. I set it on my plate, its wings sharp and precise, and nodded to no one in particular. Then I walked away. The hallway outside was cooler, the sconces casting soft light on the textured walls. I passed a mirrored panel, catching a glimpse of myself, blazer crisp, face composed, but my eyes burned with something I couldn't name. Not sadness, not shame, but a fire I'd kept banked for too long. I turned toward the staff entrance, muscle memory guiding me, years of stepping aside, letting James and his family take the spot. I'd always been the one to smooth things over, to keep the machine running while they basked in the glory. But as I reached for the door, I heard footsteps, quick and purposeful. My heart lurched, expecting another slight, another dismissal. Instead, it was Liam, one of the younger staff, holding a clipboard, his posture straightening as he saw me. "Good evening, Mrs. Marin," he said, his voice steady, respectful. "All departments are reporting smooth operations. Would you like the wine storage checked before closing?" I blinked, the weight of his words grounding me. Here, away from their table, I wasn't the help. I was Mrs. Marin, the woman who signed their paychecks, who'd fought for their raises, who'd built this place into a sanctuary. "No, Liam," I said softly, a faint smile tugging at my lips. "Everything's perfect." He nodded and vanished down the hall, but his respect lingered, a reminder of who I was out here, in the world I'd created. In that dining room, I was nothing. Out here, my name carried weight. My ownership wasn't in James's spineless silence or Margaret's sneers. It was in the deed, the 51% stake I'd secured with every cent of Aunt Leela's inheritance, the vision behind the infinity pool, the soundproofed suites, the palm-lined walkways that made this place a jewel on the Pacific coast. I exhaled, a faint laugh slipping out, bitter but freeing. "The help doesn't dine with family," I murmured, the words tasting like salt on my tongue. I stepped onto the outdoor deck, the wooden boards still warm from the day's sun. The breeze carried the scent of the ocean, sharp and briny, mixed with the faint sweetness of coral blooms. I slipped off my heels, letting the warmth seep into my feet, grounding me. The pool shimmered under the lanterns, its blue-gold surface unbroken except for the ripples where a couple from a wedding party snapped photos by the palm arch. They didn't know the owner of their paradise had just been exiled from her own dinner. I sat at the pool's edge, dipping my toes into the cool water, not for drama, but for clarity, the kind that comes when the world slows down and you feel the truth settle in your bones. I'd poured years into this place, fought city planners, negotiated with contractors, handpicked every supplier, while James played golf and Margaret hosted charity luncheons. I'd stayed up nights balancing budgets, ensuring every guest left with a story to tell, while they took credit for my work. Yet they still saw me as less, an outsider who'd clawed her way into their world. Maybe because I wasn't born with their name, their privilege. Maybe because I didn't need to be. But then, a shadow moved behind me, too close, too sudden. My heart lurched, and I turned, expecting a guest or a staff member. Instead, the deck was empty, the lanterns casting long, wavering shadows. A chill ran through me, not from the breeze but from something else, a prickle of instinct that said I wasn't alone. I stood, scanning the darkness beyond the pool. Nothing, just the rustle of palm fronds and the distant hum of the ocean. I laughed under my breath, nerves fraying. I was on edge, and I shouldn't have been, not yet. But something told me Margaret's words weren't just a slight, they were a declaration of war, and I'd just stepped onto the battlefield. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the sky outside my suite a deep indigo, the ocean's faint roar a steady pulse in the distance. My body ached from 2 hours of restless sleep, my mind replaying Margaret's voice, Victoria's smirk, James's silence. But beneath the ache was something sharper, a clarity that burned like a coal in my chest. I wrapped a cashmere shawl around my shoulders and sat at the walnut desk by the window, the first rays of light creeping over the horizon. I pulled out the leather folder from the drawer, my fingers tracing the title page. Coastal Crest Resort Holdings, LLC. My name, Sophia Marin, stared back at me in bold ink. 51% ownership stake. I ran my finger over it, feeling the weight of every sacrifice it represented. Aunt Lila's inheritance, meant for a future I hadn't planned, had saved this place from ruin. James's family had been whispering about silent investors, scrambling to keep their name out of bankruptcy headlines. I had stepped in, not for them, but for the resort, for the staff who'd become my family when my own blood failed me. Aunt Lila had been my anchor, the one who'd seen me when no one else did. "You don't need their name, Sophia," she'd said, her voice raspy from years of smoking menthols. "You build your own." She'd left me everything, her savings, her beachfront cottage, her belief in me. I'd poured it all into Coastal Crest, not because I wanted their approval, but because I wanted to prove her right. And now, as I sat here, the folder open before me, I felt her presence, a quiet strength urging me forward. A knock came at 7:15, sharp and insistent, rattling the suite's door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Margaret stood there, pearls gleaming, makeup flawless, as if the night before hadn't happened. James lingered behind her, shirt half-buttoned, eyes fixed on the floor, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Good morning, Sophia," Margaret said, her smile a practiced mask, as smooth as the marble in the ballroom. "We thought we'd clear the air after last night's misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? I stepped aside, letting them in, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You mean when you called me the help in front of your guests?" Margaret's laugh was light, dismissive, like swatting a fly. "Oh, darling, Victoria was just teasing. You know how she gets." She waved a hand as if my humiliation was a trivial thing, a moment to be brushed aside. "We've been thinking about refreshing the West Wing. New designers, a modern facade. The family wants to move fast before peak season." "The family?" I said, sitting at the desk, my fingers brushing the folder. "You mean you?" I turned the folder to face them, tapping the deed. "Let's be clear on who makes the decisions here." Margaret's eyes locked on the document, her smile faltering for a split second, a crack in her polished facade. James squinted as if seeing it for the first time. This is your name?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but unyielding. "Since last March. And before you think about transferring anything to the family trust, I'd need to sign off. I don't recall being asked." Silence swallowed the room, heavy as a storm cloud. Margaret's face drained of color, her pearls suddenly too tight against her throat. James just stared at the floor, a guest in his own marriage, his silence louder than any apology he could have offered. They left soon after, their footsteps echoing down the hall like a retreat, but I knew this wasn't over. Margaret didn't surrender, she regrouped. By noon, I was in downtown Los Angeles, the city's pulse a stark contrast to the resort's serene cliffs. The offices of Voss & Partners sat in a sleek high-rise all glass and steel, a fortress of power. Rachel Voss, my attorney, greeted me in a tailored navy blazer, her eyes sharp as she closed the door behind us. "They're trying to write you out," she said, scanning the trust amendment they'd sent last month, a document I hadn't signed. "Good thing you didn't. They wanted the resort listed as part of the Brandt estate without your consent." "Can they do anything without my approval?" I asked, my voice steady despite the churn in my stomach, the memory of Margaret's words still stinging. "Not legally," Rachel said, her tone matter-of-fact. No changes over $5,000, 0 cents without your signature. You're the majority stakeholder." She leaned back, assessing me, her glasses catching the light. "You want to play hardball?" "No," I said, my voice low but resolute. "I want them to know the game isn't theirs anymore." Rachel nodded, her fingers already moving across her tablet, drafting a letter to formalize my control. "Consider it done," she said. "But Sophia, be careful. People like Margaret don't lose gracefully." That evening, I returned to the resort, the sunset painting the cliffs in hues of fire and amber. I didn't go to my suite. Instead, I headed to the fire pit by the main deck, where the palm trees swayed and guests sipped cocktails under the stars. The air was warm, the ocean's rhythm a steady heartbeat. I sat alone, a courier envelope with Rachel's legal documents beside me, their weight a quiet promise. Victoria passed by, her heels clicking sharply, her eyes flicking to the envelope before she snapped a photo, probably to spin some narrative to her followers. "Just business," she said loudly, her voice carrying to nearby guests, then quieter, almost a hiss. "What are you planning, Sophia?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was already in motion, and it was louder than her words could ever be. But as she walked away, her silhouette framed against the fading light, I felt that prickle again, the same instinct from the night before. I scanned the deck, the shadows deeper now, the lanterns casting pools of light that didn't quite reach the edges. A faint creak came from above, and I looked up, my breath catching. The chandelier in the open-air pavilion swayed slightly, its cables taut, a bolt loose at its base. I stepped back, heart pounding, just as a maintenance worker appeared, toolbox in hand, his face pale. "Mrs. Marin," he said, voice tight, "that shouldn't be moving. I'll get it secured." I nodded, my pulse still racing. An accident, maybe. But as he climbed a ladder to inspect it, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had tampered with it, that the war I'd sensed last night was already escalating. The next day, I was in my suite, reviewing staff schedules, when a faint hiss caught my attention. The air felt heavy, wrong. I traced the sound to the gas fireplace, its valve slightly open, a faint chemical smell seeping into the room. I shut it off, heart pounding, and called maintenance. They confirmed the line had been tampered with. A subtle cut that could have filled the room with gas while I slept. I stood there, the folder of ownership papers still open on my desk, and realized this wasn't just about words anymore. Someone wanted me gone, and they weren't waiting for legal battles. By midweek, I was walking the resort's east wing when the elevator I stepped into lurched, the lights flickering before it plummeted a floor. I braced against the walls, forcing the doors open with shaking hands, scrambling out just before it stabilized. The technician who arrived later found the cables frayed, not by wear, but by a deliberate cut. I didn't report it to James or Margaret. I didn't trust them to care. At a charity luncheon, I sipped my wine, only to feel my throat tighten, my vision blurring. I stumbled to the restroom, forcing myself to vomit, my hands shaking as I dialed for help. The hospital confirmed a trace of poison, odorless, tasteless, slipped into my glass. I returned to the resort that night, my resolve hardening. They weren't just fighting for control. They were fighting for my life. The final incident came in the archives, where Liam had slipped me a key to a locked room. I was alone, flipping through a dusty ledger when a masked figure lunged from the shadows, a blade glinting. I ducked, grabbing a metal file box and swinging it hard, knocking them back. They fled before I could see their face, but the ledger I held revealed Victoria's bribes and forged signatures, a blueprint of their betrayal. I stood on the deck that night, the ocean's roar louder now, the stars sharp above. The legal documents were scanned, the truth ready to be unleashed. Margaret and Victoria thought they could erase me, but they'd forgotten who built this empire. I wasn't just fighting for Coastal Crest, I was fighting for myself, for Aunt Lila's belief in me, for every staff member who'd stood by me. And as the wind carried the salt and the promise of a storm, I knew this was only the beginning. The ocean's roar was a constant pulse beneath my suite's windows, a reminder that the world kept moving even when my own seemed to teeter on the edge. I stood at the desk, the leather-bound ledger from the archives open before me, its pages heavy with secrets, Victoria's bribes to inspectors, signatures that shouldn't exist. My hands trembled as I scanned each document onto a secure drive, the faint hum of the scanner a counterpoint to the storm brewing inside me. Coastal Crest Resort, my sanctuary, my empire, was under siege, not just by Margaret and Victoria's words, but by their actions, dangerous, calculated, and far-reaching. The chandelier, the gas leak, the elevator, the poison, the masked attacker in the archives. They weren't accidents. They were warnings. But I wasn't running. Not anymore. I'm Sophia Marin, and I'd built this place from the ashes of my husband's family's failures. My 51% ownership wasn't just a number. It was a shield, forged from Aunt Lila's inheritance and my own relentless drive. But shields can crack, and as I stood there, the weight of the ledger in my hands, I knew the battle was only beginning. Margaret and Victoria weren't just fighting for control. They were fighting to erase me, to rewrite the story of Coastal Crest as their own. And James, my husband, was still a shadow in their game, his silence a betrayal sharper than any knife. The horizon outside was a deep indigo, the stars sharp against the night sky. I closed the laptop, the drive now holding the truth that could unravel their empire. But truth is a weapon that cuts both ways, and I needed to wield it carefully. I slipped the drive into a hidden pocket in my blazer and moved to the balcony, the cool air brushing my skin, carrying the salt of the Pacific. The resort below buzzed with life, guests laughing by the pool, staff weaving through the crowd with trays of sparkling wine. They didn't know the war being waged in the shadows, the stakes that hung over every polished surface. But I did, and as I gripped the railing, my resolve hardened. They'd tried to break me with words, with sabotage, with poison. They'd underestimated me, and that was their first mistake. The next morning, the resort was alive with the hum of a new day, but the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I dressed deliberately. No heels, no sparkle, just a pressed linen blouse and navy slacks, my hair pulled back in a low twist. The look said I was here to be heard, not seen. I was heading to the cafe when Gavin, the head concierge, caught my eye from across the courtyard. He didn't just nod, as he usually did. He walked over, a clean napkin in hand, and pulled out a chair for me at a patio table. "Cappuccino with oat milk, right, Mrs. Marin?" he asked, his voice steady, his eyes holding mine for a moment longer than necessary. I smiled, the gesture grounding me. "Exactly right, Gavin. Thank you." He set the napkin across my lap and stepped back, but not before I caught the faintest flicker of a smile. It was subtle, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that out here, among the staff who'd seen me build this place, I wasn't the help. I was their leader, their ally, and then I saw her. Victoria, striding into the cafe, her pastel-sheath dress catching the morning sun, her pearl studs glinting like tiny weapons, her heels clicked too sharply on the tiles, her smile too tight. She saw Gavin's gesture, saw him ignore her, and the twitch in her cheek betrayed her. She masked it quickly, her voice bright as she approached. "Oh, there you are, Sophia. I thought we could start the week with a united front. There is a lunch today, travel influencers, millions of followers. James thought we should all join." I stirred my cappuccino, the foam swirling in slow, deliberate circles. "A united front," I said, my tone even. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes didn't match it. She leaned in, her voice dropping. Optics matter, Sophia. It helps if we look like we work together. I set my spoon down, meeting her gaze. Fine. I'll attend. Her eyes flicked to the folder on the table, the one containing the ownership deed left visible for a reason. Of course, she said, her voice breezy now. After all, you're our investor. Then sweeter, sharper. Though you're still learning the nuance of luxury clientele, aren't you? I didn't flinch, just took another sip. Gavin returned to refill my water, asking if I wanted an extra lemon slice without once glancing at her. The slight wasn't lost on Victoria. Her smile tightened and she turned on her heel, her departure as sharp as her arrival. The lunch was a spectacle, a curated dream for the Instagram age. The influencers, young and polished, snapped selfies mid-salad, their laughter as bright as the ocean view. James played host, his charm effortless, sliding between compliments and business nods like he was born for it. Victoria, ever the orchestrator, laughed too hard, her comments dripping with self-aggrandizement. We built this place with vision and grit, she said, her hand sweeping toward the clips as if she'd laid the foundation herself. Family values, right, Sophia? I nodded, my silence louder than her performance. I answered when addressed, but I didn't interrupt. My restraint made her nervous, her glances darting to me as if waiting for a reaction. Then one of the influencers, a woman with 1 million followers and a knack for bluntness, leaned forward. Who actually owns this place? Victoria jumped in, her voice smooth. It's a family affair. We all contribute in our way. I met the influencer's eyes across the table. I own the majority stake, I said, my voice even. 51%. The table stilled. Victoria's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, her forced chuckle barely masking the choke in her throat. She's such a numbers person, she said, but no one laughed. The moment hung there, heavy, undeniable. I excused myself, the hallway to the staff kitchen quiet as I headed toward the east wing. Quick steps echoed behind me, and I turned, expecting a server. It was Victoria, her face a mask of barely contained fury. Don't get too comfortable, she hissed, her voice low, meant for me alone. You might have paperwork, but this place breathes my name. I paused near the employee break room, glancing over my shoulder. Then let's see whose name the staff whisper when no one's listening. Her eyes widened, a flicker of doubt breaking through her bravado. Before she could respond, Maria, a longtime housekeeper, passed by, carrying fresh linens. She stopped, bowed her head slightly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Maria. Not to Victoria, just me. Victoria stormed off, brushing past Maria, her heels a sharp staccato against the tiles. That evening, I was by the fire pit, the legal envelope still beside me, when James called. His voice was tight, fraying. Did you change the expense authorizations for maintenance? He asked. I watched the twilight spill across the pool deck, the flames casting warm shadows. I restricted large purchases pending written approval, I said evenly. Standard for majority owners. A pause. I didn't realize you were planning to enforce it. You could have told me about the trust document changes your mother tried to sneak through, I countered. Silence. We hung up soon after, the weight of his inaction settling like dust. Later, in the staff lounge, Gavin and Maria waited, the blinds drawn. We're not trying to cause tension, Gavin began, his voice low. But we've seen how she treats people, like we're invisible. You saw us. I didn't make a speech. My hands were clasped, and for once I let the exhaustion in my eyes show. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. Back in my suite, an RSVP email pinged. Victoria had invited Ethan Caldwell, a real estate developer known for gutting historic properties. No mention to me, but I remembered his hungry eyes on Coastal Crest last year. I murmured, "If she's bringing family, so will I." I dialed my brother-in-law Alex, but hesitated, my thumb hovering over the send button. Footsteps echoed in the lobby, measured, confident. Ethan Caldwell strolled in, his loafers gleaming, blazer sleeves rolled up like he was here to play but meant business. He shook James's hand, his smile too wide, then glanced at me. "Housekeeping's gotten stylish," he said with a chuckle, expecting me to laugh. James's laugh came late, hollow. "She's not," he began, but Ethan was already talking, dropping terms like rebranding opportunity and luxury footprint, his architectural prints slapping the concierge desk. I stood behind him, silent, memorizing every word. He didn't realize I was there, and that was his mistake. The next day, I was crossing the courtyard when Gavin slipped me a brass key, its tag faded. "Archives. Do not enter." "Found it in a drawer Victoria marked off limits," he whispered. "Figured it wasn't just for her." I nodded, the key heavy in my palm. That evening, while guests sipped cocktails by the pool, I slipped into the back corridor, the air stale with mildew. The archive door was dusty, the lock stiff. Inside, file cabinets lined the walls, boxes sagging under their weight. I opened a drawer. Guest logs, menus, nothing useful. Then, beneath folded linens, I found a leather-bound journal, my father's handwriting on the label, "Financial Personnel Legacy Account." My hands trembled as I flipped it open. Payoffs to inspectors signed by Victoria, side deals with Ethan, a land transfer, my father's signature dated months after his death. Taped beside it, a contract for coastal expansion, witnessed by Victoria, the ink too fresh. The walls closed in. My face burned, not with rage, but with the realization that while I'd been choosing his headstone, she'd been forging his name. A creak behind me snapped my head around. A shadow moved, too fast. A figure lunged, a blade glinting. I ducked, grabbing a file box and swinging it hard, knocking them back. They fled, footsteps fading. My heart pounded, but I didn't scream. I scanned the journal, every page, every lie, onto the drive. The legacy gala was Margaret's crown jewel, the ballroom a spectacle of chandeliers and imported crystal. I wore a plain gray dress, no embellishments, my hair in a simple twist. I didn't need shine. I needed focus. A staffer pointed me to the staff table, tucked by the kitchen doors. I sat beside Chef Rosa's apprentice, who tried to give me his seat. "Let's both sit," I said, breaking my bread roll and handing him half. "Like family." Margaret stood, her midnight gown shimmering, her voice syrupy. "We honor resilience, legacy, those who held this place together." She claimed credit for saving Coastal Crest, James at her side, silent. Ethan raised a glass. "To Margaret, the woman who salvaged a sinking ship." Some clapped, others hesitated. A server reached for my plate while I held my fork, hesitating. Margaret's laugh rang out, "The help doesn't dine with family. Tradition." The silence was thick, suffocating. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked to the edge of the room. I handed a silver USB drive to the mayor's aide, a woman I'd met weeks ago. "Make sure she sees it," I said. Then I approached the microphone, adjusted it, and looked at Margaret. I smiled, not for cameras, but for her. A smile that said I was done playing her game. I left without a word. Pings started as I reached the lobby. Notifications lit up. "Is this real?" That's her signature. Look at the date. The forged documents were out, the truth spreading like wildfire. I walked past the concierge, through the archway into the cool night air. James called out, half jogging toward me, his jacket unbuttoned. You knew? He panted. All this time? You did too, I said quietly. You just chose not to see. I walked to my car, the silence mine at last. Morning brought chaos. News vans lined the cliffs, cameras flashing. Headlines screamed, resort heir falsifies ownership, legal storm ahead. My name was everywhere, but my face wasn't. I pulled on a dark pantsuit, tied my hair up, not to impress but to armor myself. Rachel's office in a converted bank building was a fortress of calm. She slid a folder across the table. Your father never signed the final transfer, she said. It's illegal. The resort is half yours by law. How long until it's official? I asked. Could be a year if they fight, she said, but Margaret's too loud. That's our edge. A knock. The receptionist. A man's here. Calder Brandt. James. Let him in, I said. He looked wrecked, shirt wrinkled, eyes haunted. I didn't know where else to go, he said. You've always had options, I replied. You just didn't like where they led. He rubbed his hands together. I knew about the forged transfer. She said it was to smooth things over while Dad was sick. I didn't want to fight her. You wanted the illusion of family more than the truth, I said. He didn't deny it. He stepped back, whispering, I'm sorry. But I wasn't ready to absolve him. By afternoon, the boardroom was packed. HOA reps, shareholders, reporters. I handed out copies of the deed, the forged prenuptial, the county clerk's verification. Margaret's claim to sole authority is under legal challenge, I began. Her mother, Joanna Weatherby, manipulated documents to consolidate power. Murmurs rose. Killian Bragg, HOA chair, cleared his throat. With 60% shareholder backing, you hold interim operational authority. Margaret, in a cream blazer, went rigid. This is a smear campaign, she spat. She's ruining my daughter's wedding week. I walked out of your wedding with nothing, I said. Everything you lost, you stole first. Cameras flashed. She stormed out, shaking. That night, a white envelope slid under my door. Inside, a photo of Joanna, young, outside a notary's office and a deed in her maiden name. A scrawled note. She was never just a guest, she was always planning this. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Joanna's voice, smooth, chilling. You think you've won? I built this before you were born. I'll burn it down before I hand it to you. Then let's see who burns first, I said. The line went dead. The next morning, a news segment aired. Caretaker turned gold digger. My face, twisted in manipulated clips, painted me as a schemer. I pulled unedited footage, me helping a guest, not seducing them, and sent it to Rachel. At a press conference, I played the truth. You've seen their story, I said. Now see what they cut out. The room buzzed. James stepped forward, taking the mic. I was blind. I let my mother erase Sophia. I interrupted. You weren't blind, you were silent. That's worse. Margaret was removed from the executive suite, screaming, You'll regret this. Joanna filed a countersuit, alleging distress. In court, Rachel presented bank records, $280,000, 0 cents diverted by Joanna. Victoria testified, faltering. She said I had to get Sophia out. The judge ruled in my favor, upholding my ownership, holding my father's will, full control of all properties if the family betrayed me. That night, I reopened the dining room, surrounded by staff, my true family. The table was full, except for Joanna's empty seat. I stood on the rooftop, the city glowing below, and knew my silence had been louder than their lies.